Welcome back to America Decides. It has been nearly 6 months since the 2024 general election, but one race still remains uncertified. It's the North Carolina Supreme Court justice race between Democratic incumbent Justice Allison Riggs and Republican challenger Judge Jefferson Griffin. He is seeking to toss out roughly 65,000 military and overseas ballots. Let's bring in David Becker. He is a CBS News election law expert and political contributor. He is also the executive director for the Center for Election Innovation and Research. David, great to be with you today. So the latest court ruling on this just unfolded last night in favor of Justice Riggs. So help us understand first how we got here and what that ruling says.
So, as you mentioned, this is the very last case that's yet to be certified. It is a very close race for the North Carolina Supreme Court. Justice Riggs won that race by about 700 votes. And that's not that uncommon in North Carolina. There was a very recent Supreme Court race just a couple years ago where a sitting Supreme Court justice lost by just a few hundred votes also. So it's very common for these races to be close. And what happened is after that election, the losing candidate, Judge Griffin, has filed cases in state court to try to get votes thrown out from registered voters, voters who thought they were following the rules as they were described by the State Board of Elections and the courts as they were defined by them prior to the election. And then there's also this parallel track of federal court cases, and that's what happened last night with the federal court saying that a state Supreme Court decision, an appellate court decision, which required review of some of those voters and notice going to the voters trying to seek to get additional information from the voters, that was stayed, that was enjoined pending further federal court review. And you can understand why. It's because in American history, we've never had a case where voters had followed the rules that were defined by the courts and the election officials before the election and had those rules changed on them after the election. This is the first case like that. And it's obviously raising some serious concern both in the federal courts and perhaps in the state courts.
And what is Judge Griffin saying? What is his argument for trying to toss these 65,000 votes out? So
there's 3 different groups of voters that he's challenging, and he's choosing certain areas of North Carolina to challenge them, probably areas where he thinks Justice Riggs did better. So there's a large group of voters who just didn't have a driver's license number or some other identifying number in the voter registration database. It's important to note that's probably not because they didn't provide it. They probably did provide it. It just wasn't collected and stored appropriately by government officials. And it's also important to note that the North Carolina voter registration database is one of a very small number of states that actually publishes it on the internet. This is all known to all of the candidates well in advance. They could have challenged under North Carolina law any voter they thought was ineligible for any particular reason prior to the election. That was not done here.
Why didn't he? Does he have an answer for why he waited until after?
It's a very good question. I think the courts are really going to look at that very carefully because if a candidate who loses waits too long, they're really going to have trouble bringing that claim after they've lost. Another couple of categories, there's these military and overseas voters that were told they didn't need to provide ID prior to the when they cast a ballot because they were military and overseas voters, and that was difficult for them. They were told that was upheld by the courts. Now he's challenging that after the fact. And then there's a very small number of voters who fall into this category of people who never actually resided in North Carolina, but are probably the children of overseas citizens who last lived in North Carolina. And they were allowed under North Carolina state law to participate. Those votes are also at issue. That's the smallest group. The State Board of Elections reviewed all of these after the Supreme Court ruled, and they found that there's only about 1,500 votes that are probably actually at issue. And they were going to send notice to those individuals, but the federal courts have stayed that for now, waiting to review it further.
So can you talk about the broader significance of this? I imagine it's not typical for there not to be a decision half a year after the election. And so what significance does the outcome in this case have on elections?
Well, it could have a tremendous significance because it's not only the distance of time since the election occurred, but the fact that the losing candidate is challenging rules that voters relied upon when they cast a ballot in November.
Right.
Like they were told by the state board and the courts that if they did these certain things, if they jumped through hoops, North Carolina was enacting a new voter ID requirement, which they all followed and showed ID. If they did all of these things, their ballots would count. And this would be the first time in American history where that wasn't the case. And so it could be very, very dangerous for future elections if the courts follow the rulings.
Well, we hope to have you back whenever it is decided so you can help us unpack it. Thank you so much, David Becker.
Thank you.